a Piece of Hope podcast. Conversations, stories, advice from the autism community for the autism community.
All right, welcome back to A Piece of Hope podcast. So this week we have Ashley Lauren here, and she's a mom of a child with autism, and she is also here to talk to us about a business that she started. So welcome.
Hi.
So glad to have you.
Thank you for having me today.
So let's just go into what we're already talking about and just your whole story. I love this. This whole thing is awesome.
Okay, so I basically started a business because of my journey with my son, trying to get him diagnosed with autism. I'm just going to back it up just a little bit for some backstory, but my son Oliver, it was first put on my radar around 3 from my pediatrician when I was talking to her about how different he was from my older one. And I described some things, and she said, it kind of sounds like he has Asperger's. You might want to have some evaluations done with him. And so I just didn't skip a beat, and I'm like, okay, well then that's what I have to do. And so I started on that journey, and it was really difficult because it's taken 4 years to get a diagnosis for him. He's now 7, so it's been quite the journey. But he's really high functioning, and so that's been a challenge for me getting that diagnosis for him, because psychologists would, spend 10, 15 minutes with him and say, he's fine, he's just a little moody. But my mom gut knew that was not the case. I'm like, you need to spend more time with him. You need to see what I see. And so I hopped around from psychologist. In the meantime, I went through a divorce and moved from Colorado back to Georgia. And that was really frustrating because they actually had me start over with new people. They wouldn't transfer my information over to the state of Georgia. So all of the people that I had met with in Colorado, they wouldn't transfer any of it. So that was really frustrating.
And it was already a really difficult journey.
Yes, exactly. So I got back to Georgia and I started over. And finally, in October, I found someone who would hear my concerns. She spent a lot of great quality time with not just me and Oliver, but, I just really felt heard. And she said, when she was giving me the diagnosis, she said, it was pretty clear to me early on that he does have autism. If those other people would have spent just a little bit more time with them, they would have seen it. And so then it was just like this huge sigh of relief, like, oh my gosh, finally, I finally have a diagnosis for him.
Validation for that mom gut.
Yeah, for sure. But my business kind of started, Oliver started school. He started kindergarten, and at the time he didn't have a diagnosis still. Mm-hmm. So he was placed in a gen ed setting, and I went into the school year proactive. I'm like, Oliver's being tested for Asperger's. I didn't know that they didn't diagnose Asperger's still, so I kept telling he's borderline Asperger's or whatever. So I was putting that on their radar, and day 1, Oliver went to kindergarten and came home with a crown and had this great day at school. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is awesome, because he previously had been asked not to come back to 2 different preschools. And so I thought, well, maybe this is different. And then day 2 happened.
No.
And it was just okay, we've got to get on top of this. And so immediately the school started doing their end of evaluations, trying to get him into special ed. And I love the school that he was at, for sure. They did everything that they could for him. But it wasn't until February that he was placed into special ed with an EBD diagnosis, even though he wasn't diagnosed with EBD at the time, emotional behavior disorder, for those of you that don't know. The little letter things. What's that called? When you have the letters?
The acronyms?
Yeah, acronyms. Acronyms.
Yeah.
I'm bad at all the acronyms. So EBD is emotional behavior disorder. From August until February of kindergarten year, Oliver was in a gen ed setting. And I kept getting phone calls you have to come pick him up. And it was just really heartbreaking, knowing and all of the teachers there and all of his special ed team, they all knew that he needed help. And we were all so helpless, like, and everybody was rooting for him. They're like, it wasn't just a bad kid who had bad behaviors. Like, clearly,
a kid that needed support.
Yes. And what's so sweet is he developed these really great relationships with the assistant principal there. He took such great interest in Oliver, and Oliver just adores him. So every time he sees him now, he just gives him the biggest hug. But he made him feel seen and feel loved, and that his outbursts and his meltdowns were okay. Like, that's just how it was. Mm-hmm. And that didn't make him a bad kid.
Don't you wish we had more people like that in the
my
world
gosh.
that were just a little more accepting?
Yes, so much. After lots and lots and lots and lots of tears and just crying like all the time, nightly, my fiance, my boyfriend at the time, now my fiance, encouraged me to find a hobby, basically to have something to take my mind off of things and to de-stress. And so he's like, well, you like necklaces. Why don't you just make a necklace? And I thought, I don't know how the heck to make a necklace. Like, what do you do? So like anybody would do, they would YouTube it. Mm-hmm. And so I YouTubed it and ordered some things off of Amazon. I'm like, all right, I can do this. And so I made a necklace for myself, and I'm like, oh, this makes me feel so great.
Is the one you're wearing now, is that one that you've made?
Yes, I've made this one. I started out, though, making a lot of agates, which are like sliced stone looking. Oh. They're really cool. So that's how I got my big start, I guess. I wouldn't say big start, but, got my foot in the door,
yeah.
And then I've always loved custom things. And so I ordered a metal stamping kit, and I thought, I'm going to make some, I'm going to stamp on our spoons or things like that, just something crafty. And so I made a necklace, and then I also stamped something, and one of my kids needed me, and my stamping just happened to fall on top of my stone. And so when I turned around, I was like, oh, that's really pretty together. And so then I started creating custom stamped stones. And that's really how I got my start. And I would do a lot of, it was around Mother's Day. And so I would do a lot of kids' birthdays and names and that kind of stuff, and just sell them to my Facebook friends, basically. And then I got a name in the community, and it just kept growing and growing. And initially, that wasn't very fulfilling for me, doing all of the custom names and that kind of stuff. It just wasn't my thing. But
it all started just as an outlet to kind of get through that diagnosis and all those frustrations.
Yes. And then Justin, my fiance, encouraged me, like, well, maybe you can make some extra cash from it. Try to sell it to some of your Facebook friends. And so then it just kind of spiraled from there. And I never intended it to grow it into this thing, but it just organically grew. And so I didn't really enjoy putting the names and birthdates and that kind of stuff. And so I wanted to do something more meaningful and something that would give me fulfillment. And I went through a really tough divorce before, and I just had a lot of words of affirmation and things like that that really struck a chord with me. And so it initially started with me just putting the phrase choose joy on something. And to me, that was very satisfying. But a lot of other people, choose joy, oh, that's a cute saying or whatever. But when I put why I choose joy, then I started having responses. And I learned that being vulnerable and sharing yourself, like so many other people go through things that feel alone. But when you have the courage to be vulnerable and open yourself up, people can identify with you. And so I told a little story about how choose joy means so much to me, because when I was going through my divorce, actually went to commit suicide, and I was in my garage in my van ready to say goodbye, and I saw my oldest son's bike, and it just was like, oh my gosh, Ashley, what the heck are you doing? Like, you have 3 kids that need you. My youngest, I was nursing at the time, so he was itty bitty, and I just snapped out of it. And I took on this motto of like, okay, every day you have to wake up and you have to find a reason to choose joy. And so that became my kids. I would choose joy for my kids. And so it took me a while to go into detail with people about that, because it's embarrassing talking about things like depression and suicide and anxiety and things like that. And it's just not often talked about. And so
I think it's so brave of you, though, to not only, put your information out there, like, on the internet, and also, I just love Choose Joy, but just, that's what this whole podcast is about, is, like, having other parents and families listen to this and relate to it, and maybe they can find that hope, they can find that joy and that reason to keep going, because they have that story of someone else who's been through, because you're right, people don't talk about the really, really bad days.
Right.
They talk about,
their highlight reel.
Yes, the highlight reel. And life is so much more. Life is not a highlight reel.
It is not. And I was in the midst of, like, bad depression. I had never had depression before until going through my divorce. And, oh my gosh, it's terrifying. Like, it's really a lot of anxiety and things like that. That was the same time
you're trying to get this diagnosis as well, right?
Yes, and my youngest son was actually something else that I'm okay talking about now is I actually became anorexic during that time because of stress. And so I'm nursing and I'm not eating. And my youngest actually became failure to thrive during that time. And it was terrifying. And all of my family was in Georgia, and my now he's my ex-husband, but we were separated at the time, and I just felt so alone going through all of this stuff, trying to get a diagnosis, trying to go to feeding therapy. And then my oldest, he has something called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is genetic. It's just a connective tissue disorder. So I was also doing therapy with him, and I just felt so stretched that I couldn't take it anymore. And so yeah, that's where I was in Colorado. And when I was able to share my story and share some of myself, the response that I saw from people sending me messages like, oh my gosh, I've been through this. I felt so alone. Thank you for talking about it. And people started, relating to me. And so then it was like, I really like that I had an impact on people. So then I would share something else, and then I would share something else, and why I put hope on this one. Mm-hmm. Because, on the other side of things now, I can see that there was hope there. And so if you're in a season where you feel like you do want to commit suicide or something like that, like, there's hope there that there is something on the other side of things for you. But so that's how it all started, and it grew into this thing, and I realized through all of that is actually not my passion. It's not making jewelry. My passion it's now using my voice to help others who don't have a voice or feel like they don't have a voice or can't speak for themselves, and helping them find their voice. So for me, previously in my relationship, I just felt like my opinion never mattered. I wasn't good enough, things like that. And if I would look back now on my life a few years ago and think of how I am currently, there's no way that I would ever think that I would be speaking about anything, much less being a guest on any podcasts or anything like that, because I was so afraid to say the wrong thing or to even have an opinion. And so now, by using my voice and sharing my story and being vulnerable and opening up, the impact that I'm having on others, I constantly am getting messages sent to me daily like, oh my gosh, thank you for, how are you doing this? Or how did you do that? And so that's what my passion is now, is using my voice and helping others find their voice. So
I feel like that's such a beautiful story when you're saying that you took that moment to choose joy. You had to make that decision to keep going. And in turn, you're like helping others find hope and, find the light at the end of the tunnel and get out of the trenches. So I'm so glad you're here today.
I mean, you're like the person version of why we started the podcast, like to put things out there to give people hope. Like the name of the podcast is A Piece of Hope.
So, I love that.
I think that, we're here to talk about the clothing and stuff, but I think that the whole beginning of this was kind of like to solidify why we even do this, to put it out there for, people that listen that maybe are at a spot in life where they don't have any hope. So
exactly.
Yeah.
You've got to talk about these t-shirts, guys. You've got to go and look at the picture that we'll post of these awesome shirts that she's making. I love these.
Okay, so Oliver was finally diagnosed in October, and since then I have been a big advocate for him and just a huge fan, always on the sidelines, like, okay, you have this diagnosis, but that does not have to define who you are. That does not have to hold you back from doing anything. Like, if anything, it's going to enhance things for you because, like, yes, you have a diagnosis of autism. That's how it is. Like, but that's part of you, and that's who you are. And I adore him. I love him. And so I wanted to create something that would be a conversation starter that is that he would be proud to wear, that I'm proud to wear, and that he would see his names with all of these other people and realize the potential that he has regardless of his diagnosis. So I created these shirts. I don't know if have you ever seen squad shirts before?
Yeah.
Okay. So I created I did my
I'm a
own
big fan of squad shirts.
So I did my own little version of a squad shirt, and I made autism squad shirts. But the thing that's really cool about them is that they're customizable because, like I said earlier, I love custom things. And you can actually put your own last name in there with the other people that are on the shirt, which are Einstein and Mozart and Michelangelo. And through my research, of course, they did not diagnose autism back in the day. However, researchers have studied these three names, and they feel like they actually are parallel to what the autism spectrum is. So they're believed to be on the spectrum. And I'm believing that they're on the spectrum because they're awesome, incredible people. And it's just like, it goes to show you, like, everybody knows who Einstein is, you know? And it's like, oh my gosh, Einstein, all the things that Einstein has done, and he's on the spectrum. Like, you have the potential to do something. And yes, Einstein was quirky and weird and had outbursts and things like that. And, like, people judged him. And he is Einstein, and now he is, like, you know,
the one that everybody looks up to.
It's like, and so I put Michelangelo on there because Oliver actually wants to be an artist when he grows up. That's what his thing is, art. He loves it. And so I'm like, you know, Michelangelo, and I show him pictures because I don't hide it from him that he has autism. I don't think that there's any shame in it, and I don't think that he should necessarily be treated differently by peers or anything like that. And so I want him to be proud of who he is, and
have role models.
Yes,
and
exactly.
People to look up to.
And so I bought him a book that has autism heroes in it, and so that kind of leads me into our next little adventure that we're working on. Oliver and I are writing a book together about autism heroes, and so someone that he really looks up to that is on the spectrum is actually the creator of Pokemon. And
we have so many kids that love Pokemon.
And a lot of people don't realize that the creator of Pokemon is actually on the spectrum. He has Asperger's. And from what I have researched, he said that he was obsessed with bugs. And so he took his obsession and created Pokemon and had them morph into all this kind of stuff that I don't understand, but Oliver does, and he loves it. And so just people like that, people, you know, they don't realize that people on the spectrum can make an impact in the world and do make an impact on the world. And so something as little as Pokemon, I mean, creating Pokemon, and it's this huge phenomenon, and everybody knows Pokemon. So I just think that's really neat, and I love being able to have role models for Oliver and other kids on the spectrum that, you know, that they can have people to aspire to be like.
Exactly. I think this is just an amazing story, even from beginning to end, about how you are the epitome of a mama bear. You know that your baby needs something, that your kid needs something, and you fought for your kid from day one, even when everybody was essentially telling you you're wrong and you're crazy, he's fine. And then when she got that diagnosis, embraced it and embraced your kid and loved your kid, and look at all this stuff that you have done just for him, really, and just embracing who he is. I think that's really beautiful.
Something that I did want to point out about the shirts is I came up with a design in December, and it has taken me a long time to find a company to work with because they are custom, and I didn't want it to be... No offense to anyone. I hope I don't offend anyone, but I didn't want it to be a vinyl shirt that had, I wanted it to be a shirt that you couldn't feel the letters on it. That was important to me.
A high-quality T-shirt.
High-quality shirt, but I didn't, I wanted it to hold up and things like that. And so finding a company to print them was such a challenge because each name does change on the end, and I'm not ordering 50 at once. I'm ordering one at a time. And so I stumbled across this company one day. I don't even know how. Definitely a God thing, I guess, because they are a nonprofit t-shirt company called Spectrum Designs, and they hire people on the spectrum to work for them. So every purchase that you make for my shirts actually goes helping someone on the spectrum, giving them a job, things like that. And they still have super high quality standards there, but all levels of the spectrum, I just think it's so cool. And when I contacted them, before I even contacted them, I was so excited. I'm like, yes, this is what I've been waiting for. Like, this is a perfect pairing. And I called them, and they said, we don't actually do one-off shirts anymore. We got away from doing that, but we love this idea so much that we want to make it work, and we want to work with you. And so
it just all worked out.
I know. It's such a fantastic company.
I had never heard of them before. Yeah. That's one of the reasons I love the podcast, is we're finding out about all these cool companies that are doing all these awesome things. And you're right. These are really nice T-shirts.
So, yeah, I'm super excited to be working with Spectrum Designs, and that partnership is just, it's perfect.
So for people that are interested in supporting this nonprofit organization, Spectrum T-shirts, how can they get connected?
So you can find them on their website at spectrumdesigns.org. They also, this doesn't apply to us because we are in Georgia, but if you're listening to the podcast somewhere else close to them, they also have a Spectrum Bakery where they hire people in the bakery section.
Where is that at?
I think it's based out of New York. I'll have to look it up. But they have Spectrum Design, Spectrum Bakery, and they have one other. So it's 3 different companies under one umbrella that hire people on the spectrum. So definitely check them out. They are a wonderful company. The staff is so nice too, with communicating with me and everything. So definitely check that out. And then if you're interested in my shirts, you can find those at willowandashdesigns.com and just search for autism t-shirts, and they'll be the Autism Squad shirts, and we have them in adult, toddler, and youth sizes.
And we'll definitely post that on our Facebook page and our website so you guys can easily find it. No, I'm going to have to order some. These are great.
Well, and I was talking with her before we started recording, and she had asked about starting a podcast. So maybe later this year, that'll be another thing that we, post and get out there. So we'll have to see.
I'm always coming up with adventures, so you never know where you'll find me.
Well, thank you so much for coming in. This was an awesome story. I hope this really inspires some other parents that are out there. If you're going through the same thing, that there is hope out there, and that, take that time to choose joy.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm just going to say, stick with your mom gut. If you feel like your diagnosis, if you're not happy with how it went with the doctor, get a second opinion and just keep going.
A third opinion?
Yeah.
A fourth opinion?
I mean, I got probably 5 or 6. I bounced around until I felt heard. And that's the great thing, is you have the option to hop around to other people until you feel heard. And once you feel heard and all your concerns, that's what did it for me. So
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. Be sure to like and subscribe to the podcast, and be sure to check out all of the websites and links that we mentioned throughout here, and we will see you next week. Bye.
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 Thanks for listening to a Piece of Hope podcast. To learn more about Piece of Hope or to donate to a Piece of Hope Scholarship Fund, visit appleseedsaba.com/Piece of Hope. Join us next week for more stories, conversations, and advice from the autism community for the autism community.